Good evening and welcome. My name is Anupma Shanker, and I'm one of the co-curators of the South Asian Heritage Season of the Garden Cinema. And I'm very honored and slightly overwhelmed to have this opportunity to say something about tonight's film and the filmmaker. So it was about 68 years ago, on 3rd of May 1955, when an unsubtitled version of Pather Panchali premiered at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, where it was well received. It was praised as a triumph of imaginative photography. 3 months later, that same year, in 1955, it was released in Calcutta, where it opened to a not so good response. It was pretty tepid in the beginning, but that it gained momentum with time, and was eventually declared a box office success, and went on to win the National Award for the Best Film in India. But not everybody in India was pleased with the film. So there was a number of ministers in Prime Minister Nehru's cabinet, and there were several prominent members of the Hindi film industry who accused the film of exporting India's poverty to the West. So there was some backlash. Fortunately, Nehru, the Prime Minister who had been shown the film, was very moved by it, and he decided to bypass the disapproving voices, and it was sent to the Cannes Film Festival in '56, where its 35-year-old director, Satyajit Ray, was honored with the Best Human Document Prize for his debut feature. And looking back, I mean, after all these years, one could say that the rest is world cinema history, because there's hardly anything that hasn't been said about this great film, which is part of the Apu trilogy, or its director, Satyajit Ray, who is widely regarded as one of the greatest humanist poets of world cinema, and undoubtedly the greatest filmmaker that India has produced. And I think this is quite sort of like common knowledge, but Akira Kurosawa once famously said that if you have not seen Satyajit Ray's films, it's like you haven't watched The Sun and the Moon. So that's a very high praise from one great filmmaker to another. So what can one really say about this man of extraordinary talent, artistic integrity, and determination, who often referred to himself as a product of East and West equally. His roots were deeply in India, and he, with his groundbreaking films, went on to inspire a whole generation of Indian filmmakers from Bengal, which led to the new wave of Hindi cinema in the 60s. It is also quite a well-known fact that he was a man of many, many talents. He was an illustrator, a best-selling author of children's books, of course, a self-taught film director, music composer, editor, cinematographer, art director, set designer, and also a poster designer. So he did posters for all of his films, including Pather Panchali. So Ray was born in 1921 in Calcutta, and he was a man of many talents, as I said. And he wrote several books, one of which particularly is important for the trilogy, is called My Years with Apu, which offers the most fascinating first-hand accounts of his years during, before, and after making the trilogy. And it all begins in 1944, when he was working in an ad agency in Calcutta. This young man was approached by his manager, who said to him that he would like for him to draw illustrations for a Bengali novel named Pather Panchali. They were doing an abridged version for children, and this was the first time Ray had heard of the book. It was written by a Bengali author. It was quite a popular book, actually, by a man named Vibhuti Bhushan Banerjee, and it was set in 1929, then British Bengal, and was a very simple but quite a devastating story of a family struggling in devastating poverty. And the central characters included the head of the family, Harihar, his wife Sarvjaya, 2 young children, Apu and Durga, who were the central characters of the film, of course, and an elderly cousin named Indiran Thakur. And Ray read the film, and he instantly recognized it, and these are his own words, as plainly a masterpiece and a sort of encyclopedia of life in rural Bengal, with an amazingly lifelike portrayal, not just of the family, but for a host of other characters, and the vivid details of daily existence, the warmth, the humanism, the lyricism, which made the book a classic of its kind. So he read the book, and it never left his imagination. it kept lingering at the back of his mind for years. But it wasn't until 5 years later, actually, when two very consequential things happened, which really forced him to turn this thought experiment of sorts into a film. The first one happened in 1949, and he described this as one of the most dramatic events of his life. And this was his meeting with one of his idols, Jean Renoir, who had come to Calcutta for location scouting for his film The River, which was the opening film for our season. And I mean, there's so much that I could say, we don't have time, but he talks fascinatingly about these very intellectually stimulating conversations in a way between, one who was a legend, one who was soon to be. And these conversations made such a deep impact on his mind that he actually said in his book that undoubtedly it was Renoir who planted the idea of making a film in my mind. So that was a very consequential meeting. The second event, which took place in London in 1950, which was really a tipping point for him, was when he was sent to London for 6 months as part of the assignment for the ad agency where he was working at the time. And he described watching 99 films during 6 months, to be precise, and one of which was the Italian neo-realist masterpiece by De Sica, Bicycle Thieves. And this experience for Ray was like a real epiphany. He said to himself, here was a man who was doing the exact same things that he'd been wanting to do in his own film, making a film with non-professional actors in outdoor settings realistically, and even the fact that De Sica was using a poor quality negative in the film, Ray thought it really enhanced the picture quality of and the image of this brutal poverty of post-World War Italy. So the proof he'd been seeking all this while was right here. And as he left the cinema, which was Curzon Mayfair in Soho, that's when he saw the film, he used a very beautiful musical analogy to talk about the stream of mind, and he said he recognized that a modulation from a minor to a major key had already taken place. And on his way back from London in 1950 on the ship, he wrote the final treatment of Pather Panchali. So he was ready and raring to go, but then there were a number of formidable challenges that he hadn't anticipated that were about to come his way, starting with funding. So for 2 full years, he knocked at the doors of every producer in West Bengal from 1950 to 52. Not one of them would back the project because it was drastically offbeat. It was completely something else. People could recognize it for what it was. Eventually, it came down to a bit of beg, borrow, and not steal, but pawn. So there was a number of extraordinary sacrifices that were made, starting with Ray. He pawned his life insurance policy to get 7,500 rupees, which was the very first chunk of negative that he bought to shoot the film. His wife, Vijaya, a true partner, I must say, she pawned her jewelry to get the rest of the money. He sold his gramophone records, his books, everything that was like a lifeline for him. And of course, he was working throughout the period of shooting, so most of his salary went to fund the project. And towards the end of the film, they ran out of money completely after 3/4 of the film was shot, and so they approached the West Bengal government asking for funding. And this is a very funny story that his son recounted. When in the meeting, the chief minister of West Bengal said, "We don't really fund films, but since your film is called The Song of the Little Road," that's what it translates to, "we can give you some money from the road department." So they agreed, actually, because they were so desperate for the money. So that was 70,000 rupees, which then was used to, complete the project, which came with its own challenges, which makes another fascinating story. So the film was shot in a village about 10 miles from Calcutta, and there was no script, because Ray said it was all in his head. And because he was a brilliant illustrator, what he did was he made these fascinating, elaborate sketches, a great example of storyboarding to the T with notes, which you can actually see online. It circulates. And this is what was given to his technicians. Speaking of technicians, there was no money to hire, professionals without a question. So he leaned onto his close friends, many of which were cinephiles like him and shared his artistic vision. And there were 2 in particular who were very key to the project, to the trilogy, in fact, and they went on to become, they achieved great heights in their own career in Indian cinema. One of them was a 21-year-old man named Subrata Mitra, He was a still photographer, and interestingly, Ray had met him on Renoir's sets. He tried to get a job there. He wasn't hired, but he hung around the whole time and made some notes and watching Renoir, work on the film. So he came in as a cinematographer, even though he had never held a film camera. The second person was a man named Bansi Das Gupta, who was the art director of The River. So he brought that amazing experience of having worked with a European crew, with Jean Renoir and his nephew Claude. And Subrata Mitra, this cameraman, worked on about 9 features with Ray. Most of them are his critically acclaimed ones, including the trilogy. And he also worked on Merchant Ivory Productions, the initial films. He's also credited with inventing a new technique in lighting, which is called bounce lighting, which was a co-invention between him and Ray during the trilogy. So some fantastic collaborations came about. Then it comes to casting, and Ray was warned repeatedly by his crew members not to cast amateurs because everybody else was an amateur. And he, of course, did not pay heed to that, because he was driven by his instincts and the neo-realist influences, and he ended up casting quite a number of key roles with amateurs and unprofessionals. The 2 significant ones are Apu and Durga, the 2 children, who are the central part of the story and carry the film on their shoulders, really. Apu was spotted by his wife, Bijaya, in the playground, really. He was a 6-year-old boy named Subir Banerjee, who he didn't even know what a film was when he was asked. He had never been on a stage. Durga was a 12-year-old schoolgirl named Uma Das Gupta, who was found in a school. She also had no experience of acting. It's interesting that neither of these 2 individuals ever worked in any other film again. So, and they give such memorable performance in Pather Panchali that, they just kind of like etched in our memories forever as Apu and Durga. The last thing that I want to say is the music of the film. Of course, because you have to talk about the very evocative soundtrack, which is one of the highlights of the film. And again, like the rest of the things that happen in the film, it wasn't really composed in the traditional sense. It was created by Ravi Shanker, the Indian sitar maestro who had not yet become a legend, much like Ray. He was a friend of Ray, and they recorded this long piece, which ran for 14 hours, and it was done in a single studio session. And so Ravi Shankar, coming from the Indian classical background, used ragas, which are the melodic framework, which is unique to the Indian classical music. And he used a sitar, which he plays himself in the film, and a bamboo flute, with the exception of another instrument which Ray suggested, and it's called a shehnai. It's a high-pitched Indian instrument. And it has been used in the film's, I could say, the most devastating scene. I wouldn't say which one, because there are friends who haven't watched the film. And it really accentuates the emotional tempo of this scene in a very powerful way. You will recognize it when you hear it. So that's pretty much everything about the film. Interestingly, the shooting lasted for 73 days, which was decent for a group of amateurs, but it went on for 3 whole years because of all the logistical and financial, hardships. And Ray, in fact, jokingly said that Pather Panchali was a product of 3 miracles. 1, Apu's voice did not break, the little boy. 2, Durga did not grow up. She was 12 and then was 15. And 3, in the Thakrun, the 80-year-old veteran stage actress Chunibala, who plays the elderly cousin, did not die. So that was his assessment of the film. I just want to conclude with, there's an endless debate about what really makes Pather Panchali a timeless classic. And that's a question that, of course, circulates in academia a lot. But Ray was often quizzed about his style, and he responded with words like Bengali and realistic. And he also described his brand of cinema as intimate cinema. He said it was a cinema of mood and atmosphere rather than that of grandeur and predilection. He was drawn to simple themes and simple emotional situations because he thought they were more universal than the complex ones. And I think Pather Panchali really, takes all of these, and the whole trilogy, in fact, it takes all of these elements together, and it really absorbs them and becomes a manifestation of what often is described as it invented a new language in cinema itself. Because at the heart of the film is the simplest of the themes. It's a poor family struggling to make ends meet, and then you dive deeper, and then there's so much more, there is that pure and unconditional love of the siblings, that bond between Apu and Durga, which creates some of the most magical and iconic moments in the film, which also takes you on a journey from total bliss to total devastation. There is a spiritual harmony between the characters and the physical environment, and Ray was very conscious of this. And he said, particularly in Pather Panchali, in the second half, when they were filming in monsoons, and a lot more in the second part, Aparajito, when it began to rain, and the atmosphere changed, the skies became bleaker and the light shifted. He said that they noticed that there was a deeper shift in the energy of the cast and crew, and how that impacted the mood of everybody, and it spills into the performance and enhances the film itself. And lastly, there's of course this very wistful theme about the inevitability of change, for which he uses a train as a metaphor, which runs in all the three films. And it's almost like a motif, that both connects and separates the past from the present, rural from urban, childhood from adolescence, and life and death, and all of this plays out in this very minimal, realistic but intimate setting, which really, likes of which we'd never seen in India before. And I think which really continues to move and mesmerize audiences worldwide. So I hope you enjoy the film, and I thank you for your time.